Hello, everyone. My name is Naquita Murphy, and today I'll be presenting my research on how the environment we live in shape the quality of life for Black Americans, especially when relocating from major cities into a rural environment like New Mexico. So, a little introduction on this study. It's about quality of life. Right here, I have a definition of quality of life and the environmental psychology um, definition. So, quality of life isn't just about like income or health. It's shaped by where we live, our safety, our sense of belonging, and whether we feel represented or isolated. But Black Americans, especially in rural environments, are often missing from environmental psychology research. Historically, our well being has been ignored or viewed only through struggles. This research changes that by centering Black voices, experience, and strengths in rural communities so our lived realities define conversations and not stereotypes. So, what is my research question and purpose? My research answers one question: how does where you live affect your quality of life as a Black American? The study focuses on Black Americans who have left an urban city and now reside in rural New Mexico, aiming to understand the benefits, challenges, and daily realities of this transition. Environmental psychology rarely includes us. This research makes sure our voices are visible and valued. And this is an example of like a rural environment in this background here. Like, if you don't know, like, because a lot of times people get the stigma of like urban means Black, and it doesn't necessarily. So, like, urban means like it has more buildings. You don't see that much green space. So, this here is a rural environment where there is a lot of green space, if that makes sense. Urban has more buildings. To truly understand the quality of life for Black Americans in rural New Mexico, I used a mixed method design. Study one was qualitative. I conducted open ending interviews with Black men to collect real lived experiences in their own words without forcing definition or assumptions. This ensured the participants' perspective would shape the research direction. And study two, I transformed those qualitative themes into quantitative scale of a 30-item measure that reflects the reality of Black Americans in rural environments. Together, this design allows me to both honor the stories and produce data that can be used for policy, resources, and future research. In other words, listen first, measure second. That's how we make sure research reflects the people it claims to represent. For study one, I conducted interviews with 10 Black American men who had relocated from urban cities to rural New Mexico. For an example, this is an example of an urban city. A requirement to participate was that they had to self-identify as Black American. I did this on purpose because I wanted to understand the experiences of Black American individuals who personally claim that identity, not people who are labeled as Black, that is not Black American. If someone claimed to be something else, for an example, if they did not identify as Black American, I excluded their responses. I didn't even interview people if they said they were anything else. If they said they was African American, didn't interview them. And if they said they were Jamaican, Haitian, I didn't interview them. Nothing wrong with that, but I'm trying to capture the experiences of Black American people. Identity matters in this research because the way we understand ourselves influences how we understand our environment. In these interviews captured how Black lives is uniquely experienced in rural spaces like Portales and Clovis. Their lived identities were the foundation of the study, not assumed or generalized. One crucial choice I made in study one was not defining the word environment. At the start of the interview, I wanted participants to describe the space that mattered most to them in their own language. Because of that, they discuss real spaces they live in every day, not textbook definitions. They mention workplaces, classroom, churches, neighborhoods, dorms, farm, and more places that shape their lives. Participants said they felt grateful to finally be asked these questions because Black Americans in towns like Portales and Clovis, but even in their city where they came from, have often felt overlooked and unheard when it comes to environmental challenges. When we look at themes, we see both strength and stressors. So, for an example, some of the things that popped up was cost of living and financial stability. Money really matters for quality of life. Black men in the study emphasized the importance of stable income to support themselves and their families. Safety, concerns about being police different, even unsafe at school, or being singled out as the only black person. But a lot of people were talking about, like, because I had a lot of college students too, they were saying like how the teachers grade their papers different when they talk about their community in a positive light, or they just mention their community in general. Discrimination and culture isolation. People talked about racial bias, being mistreated on campus or in sports programs, and the lack of black representation in the community. One participant describes the town as feeling like a 1950s sundown town. Community and energy, church friendship, positive people were the most significant source of support and overall for black people to feel heard and valued and feel safe. Physical and natural environments, they mentioned strong winds, bad smell. They said cow shit. They didn't just say bad smell. They was talking about the cow shit that they smell. They feel like it's nasty. They don't know why it keeps coming up. It's kind of like weird to smell that all the time, especially when the winds are bad. Poor infrastructure and the fact that everything is spread far apart. So they were really mentioning this about when it comes to the hospitals being far apart. Like, hey, you might need to go to Texas to get the care that you need. So people's inner world. Participants talked about meditation, spirituality, and protecting their mental health as a coping strategy. These findings show that quality of life is not simple. It is constantly negotiated between external challenges like systematic racism and internal strengths like community and togetherness. Most importantly, the interview validated their experience, letting them feel seen and heard. So here's an example of how I organize their narratives into structured research themes, turning lived experiences into analyzable data. So as you can see here, like some of the responses I took and I placed them in boxes and themes. So that way, like, you can see how I formatted some of the information. You can press pause on the video to check that out. It's pretty cool. It's pretty neat. After identifying the 8 major themes in Study 1, I developed a brand new environmental quality of life scale in Study 2. It included 30 items that directly reflect what Black Americans in rural New Mexico said affected their well-being. I used a 5-point Likert scale from strongly disagree to agree strongly. So 1 was strongly disagree and 5 was agree strongly. Half of the items are reversed, so 15 items were reverse items. They were phrased negatively, like, I do not feel safe where I live. A positive item was, I feel connected to the community where I live. This improves accuracy because it ensures that people are reading and responding honestly rather than simply selecting the same answer automatically. What makes the scale especially important is that it is built by Black lived experiences, not assumptions or stereotype, which means future researchers can now measure rural quality of life using a tool that finally represents Black Americans. For Study 2, I surveyed 15 individuals who had all relocated from an urban to rural New Mexico, and they had been living in New Mexico for 5 years. 7 of them identified as Black American, 1 as African American, and 1 as African American and Black, which reinforced why identity matters when studying Black American experiences. The rest of the sample included white, Hispanic, biracial, and Moorish American participants. Even though the Moorish American person is probably Black American, they did not say Black American, so I included them in a pile of everybody else. Looking at multiple racial groups help show that even though we share the same physical environment, our quality of life is not always experienced the same way. In psychology, the scale demonstrates strong reliability, indicating that it is consistently measured quality of life as intended. This supports future use of the scale in larger and more diverse samples. Overall, the scale reliability measures environmental quality of life. In order for it to be reliable, a Cronbach A has to be over zero point 0.7, and mine, as you can see, was 0.811. So here we present the average scores for each quality of life theme as measured by the environmental quality of life scale. Some of the strongest domains show up under health, cost of living, community, and support. So, meaning the positive experiences were these things. Although there are challenges, people are experiencing benefits such as affordable living and supportive networks, primarily through churches and close knit communities. However, the lowest scoring themes were job, economic opportunities, and adaptation. So, yes, rural life brings peace and support. However, economic stability remains a significant challenge, particularly for Black residents. So, overall, the environment can help Black residents survive, but economy conditions make it harder to thrive. And that becomes even clearer when we break the data down by race. When we compare the experiences of Black Americans participants versus those who do not identify as Black Americans, the differences become very clear. Black American identifying participants reported lower safety, higher discrimination, fewer job opportunities, and more difficulty adapting. Although everyone shares the same physical space, Black people do not experience the same space equally. One participant even said this town feels like 1950 sundown town, illustrating how history and racial climate impacts the present day quality of life. This chart makes one thing clear. Shared geography does not necessarily mean it's the same thing as shared experiences. Race continues to shape how the same environment is lived, felt, and survived. Race changes the experience completely. This research is significant because Black American voices are often underrepresented in environmental psychology, particularly the voices of Black men. Blake and Darling pointed out that studies about Black families often ignore Black men experience or portray them only through struggle. My research challenged that by letting Black men in rural residents define their own needs and success. At the same time, Gabison and Peterson showed that systematic racism, which they call living while Black, directly affects our quality of life everywhere we go. Safety, health, access, economy opportunities, all of these are impacted by race. Kiwan and colleagues proves you can live right next to parks and still not feel comfortable using them if you don't feel welcome or protected. Proximity doesn't equal belonging. Research such as that by Wiploid and all shows that community is our superpower. Connection keeps Black people alive and when the environment isn't made for us. So this research matters because Black people deserve spaces where we are safe, represented, and supported, not invisible. Like any research, there are limitations. The sample was relatively small and mainly consisted of Black men, so the findings did not represent all Black residents because I didn't include Black women. Because we only use one rural region, Portales, Clovis, and nearby towns, results might not be generalized to other rural areas with different cultural dynamics. The study also relies solely on self-reporting data, which can be influenced by factors such as comfort level and social dynamics. Finally, because I intentionally did not define the word environment before the interview, which produced rich responses, It also meant that participants interpret the prompt differently. This is the beginning, not the end. More research is needed for broader voices. All data were self-report, meaning participants describe their own experiences in their own words. This is powerful because it centers their lived reality, but it also means findings rely on what people feel comfortable sharing rather than independently observing or statistics. The limitation is also what makes this study powerful. It focuses on the emotion and culture truth of Black Americans in rural America. Self-reporting centers lived experiences that are often ignored in environmental research. And also just basically, I feel like it really, once I did ask people, like, how did you feel about like my definition of environment, would you want to go back and change your answer? And all of them said no. I would have said the same thing, because my environment isn't this definition of this textbook. Like, who wrote this textbook? Was it somebody white? And a lot of them were asking me that, and I looked up, see who wrote the definition of this, and it was somebody white. They was like, right, so they don't explain my lived experience of what I feel like is environment. How can they tell me what environment is? So I'm glad you let me have a voice of what I feel like environment is and what quality of life is. So I kind of was really happy about that, because it just really made my study give more substance. And the fact that they all said after I told them what the definition was, they would not change their answers. They actually wanted to add more onto it. So I was kind of happy about that. Overall, this research demonstrates that the environment influences our quality of life, but our racial experience shapes how we perceive that environment. Moving from urban cities to rural New Mexico can bring peace, lower cost of living, and positive community energy. But for Black Americans, there are still real challenges, including safety concerns, cultural isolation, discrimination, and limited job opportunities. Even when we share the same physical environment, our access to safety, belonging, and opportunities isn't equal. This research calls for meaningful change in rural communities, including increased cultural representation, fair economic opportunities, and support systems that allow Black residents to thrive, not just survive. Black voices deserve to be heard when shaping environments that impact our daily life and future. All references used in this presentation and skill development are available upon request, but here are my references right here, as you can see. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so happy to answer any questions you may have about my research. Please email me at naquitamurphy@enmu.edu. Thank you. Peace.